Before we begin, take a deep breath. Let the world slow down for a while. If you enjoy quiet tales of simple moments and gentle evenings, follow Moonlit Whispers for more stories just like this one, where the world feels calm again. The morning unfurled softly over the Cotswold hills. A thin veil of mist drifted above the meadows, and the fields were the color of oatmeal and honey. The world felt half awake, birds trilling somewhere unseen, and the faintest golden blush beginning to warm the thatched rooftops of the village below. At the edge of that quiet village stood Willowmere Cottage, a little stone home tucked behind an ivy-draped gate, with white window frames and a small slate path that wound its way to the front door. It was the home of Eliza Hart, who made candles for a living, not just any candles, but ones that smelled like memory itself. Inside her cottage, all was still except for the steady tick-tick of an old wall clock and the distant hum of the kettle coming to life. Eliza was already awake. She had tied her hair into a loose bun, pulled on her soft wool cardigan, and slipped her feet into worn slippers. Her mornings always began the same way, quietly, slowly, with reverence for the small things. She filled her favorite mug, a handmade ceramic one, speckled with glaze imperfections, with hot coffee, and stood by the window for a while, watching the fog drift across the meadow. The air smelled faintly of rain and rosemary, the kind of scent that made her feel like she was living inside a poem. After her first sip, she turned toward the room at the back of the cottage, her candle studio. The studio wasn't large, but it was full of character. The walls were painted a muted sage green, and open wooden shelves held rows of glass jars, dried herbs, and bottles of essential oils, lavender, bergamot, cedarwood, and patchouli. A long wooden workbench stretched across the window, and the morning light slipped through lace curtains, scattering soft, dappled patterns across the table. She lit the small oil heater in the corner and began to prepare for her day. Making candles wasn't just her craft, it was her ritual, her way of keeping rhythm with the slow heartbeat of life. Eliza placed a saucepan on the stove, setting it within a larger pot of simmering water, her makeshift double boiler. Inside the pan went small white flakes of soy wax, glinting like snow crystals before they began to melt into translucent silk. She stirred gently with a wooden spoon, never in a rush, her movements deliberate and careful. While the wax melted, she reached for a small linen-bound notebook on her shelf. Inside were pages of handwritten recipes, each one a scent she had dreamed into existence. Some were inspired by seasons, others by feelings. Lavender and linen, honeycomb and Earl Grey, rain on cedarwood. Her most loved one, the one that sold out first at every village fair, was lavender and hearthfire. Today, she decided to make that one. She opened a small drawer and took out a bundle of dried lavender stems, tied with twine. She crushed a few blossoms between her fingers, releasing their sweet, herbal aroma into the air. Then, carefully, she added a few drops of lavender essential oil into the melted wax, followed by a hint of vanilla and a trace of clove. The scent curled upward in a soft ribbon of steam, mingling with the cool morning air. When the wax reached just the right temperature, Eliza began to pour. She held each glass jar steady with one hand, her other hand guiding the flow like a slow stream of cream. Each jar held a single centered wick, straight and true, fixed in place with a small wooden stick. The sound of pouring wax was subtle but soothing, a gentle whisper of liquid meeting glass. By mid-morning, her work table was lined with freshly poured candles, still warm and glistening. The scent of lavender filled every corner of the cottage, wrapping it in calm. Eliza stood back for a moment, admiring the neat rows of soft lilac hues. This was her favorite part, that fleeting moment when everything looked serene and unfinished, suspended in waiting. She wiped her hands on a linen cloth, then moved toward the small window seat by the studio wall. Her cat, Marble, a sleepy gray tabby with a white chin, was curled up there, purring softly. Eliza sat beside him, cradling her now cool coffee cup, and took a deep breath. Outside, the fog had lifted, revealing fields of green stretching toward the far-off hedgerows. She could hear the faint sound of a bicycle bell, the postman on his morning route. Life here was unhurried, and that was how she liked it. After her short break, she tied her apron back on and began the next stage, trimming and packaging. She preferred the old-fashioned way: brown paper, natural twine, and a single sprig of lavender tucked into each parcel. Her hands moved rhythmically, folding the paper just so, tying the bow at the perfect angle. She took great care in handwriting each label with her fountain pen, in looping letters that seemed to belong to another time. Each label carried her small emblem: Willowmere Candles, hand-poured in the Cotswolds. As she wrapped, she thought about the people who might unwrap these parcels. Someone in a small city flat, longing for the scent of the countryside, or a mother lighting a candle before bed. Eliza liked to imagine her candles glowing softly in homes far away, their little flames carrying whispers of this quiet place she loved. By noon, she had packed a dozen candles into a wicker basket lined with tissue. She would deliver them later to the village shop, the honeycomb pantry, where Mrs. Thistle, the shopkeeper, sold local handmade goods. The rest she would send out by post the next day. For now, though, it was time for lunch. She made herself a sandwich of fresh sourdough and farmhouse cheese, with sliced tomatoes from her greenhouse. The kettle whistled softly, and she brewed a cup of chamomile tea. She ate by the open window, letting the breeze carry the scent of lavender fields through the room. Marble jumped up onto the windowsill, blinking lazily. Eliza smiled at him, reaching up to scratch his chin. "Another quiet day, isn't it?" she murmured. The cat blinked as if in agreement. The afternoon stretched on in golden stillness. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, painting everything in honeyed hues. The freshly poured candles had cooled by now, smooth, creamy, and ready to be trimmed and labeled. Eliza set to work, snipping the wicks to the perfect quarter-inch, then polishing each jar with a soft cloth until it gleamed. A faint knock came at the door sometime after 3. It was Mrs. Thistle, in her mauve cardigan and knitted hat, stopping by for tea and a chat. Eliza welcomed her in, poured coffee, and set out a small plate of butter biscuits. They talked about the weather first, as everyone in the village did, and then about the upcoming winter fair. Mrs. Thistle, with her usual good cheer, said, "You know, your lavender candles are the talk of the town again. We've had customers asking when the next batch is coming." Eliza smiled a little shyly. "I'm glad people still like them. They remind me of summer, even when the skis are gray." Mrs. Thistle nodded, taking a sip. "That's what people need most, dear. A bit of summer warmth when it's gone outside." When her visitor left, Eliza stood at the door for a moment, watching her make her way down the path. The sky had turned pale blue, the kind that carried a quiet promise of evening. She could already feel the temperature dipping, the crisp scent of wood smoke from neighboring cottages curling through the air. It was nearly the hour she loved best, the candle-lighting hour. She cleared her work table, placed one of her new lavender and hearthfire candles on the windowsill, and struck a match. The wick caught, sputtered, then settled into a steady golden flame. The soft crackle of wax and wood filled the silence. As the room dimmed, the candlelight seemed to soften the edges of everything, the shelves, the jars, even her thoughts. Eliza leaned against the table, sipping the last of her lukewarm coffee, and closed her eyes for a moment. The air smelled of lavender, vanilla, and faint smoke, her own small alchemy of calm. Outside, the first stars began to appear. She thought, not unhappily, of how her days all looked much the same, the quiet rhythm, the repetition. Some might have called it solitude, but to Eliza, it was peace. She had once lived a faster life, a city job, long commutes, noise and screens. But that felt like another lifetime. Here, Every day ended in a kind of gentle completeness, as if she was part of the slow breathing of the hills themselves. The candle flickered once, then steadied. Eliza smiled faintly, drew her shawl around her shoulders, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow I'll make the rose and amber ones." And the cottage, small and warm beneath the wide English sky, seemed to hum in agreement. The next morning arrived with a whisper of rain, not the heavy, pounding kind, but the soft, silvery drizzle that seemed to bless everything it touched. The cobblestones outside glistened faintly, and drops clung like pearls to the rose bushes climbing along the cottage wall. Inside, Eliza woke to the faint patter against her window pane and smiled. Rainy mornings always felt like the world was slowing down just for her. She wrapped herself in her cardigan and padded into the kitchen, where the kettle waited patiently. The scent of coffee soon mingled with the earthy perfume of wet soil drifting through the open window. She poured herself a mug, savoring the first sip, that quiet, grounding moment before the day began. In the next room, the candles she'd made yesterday waited on the workbench, neatly labeled and ready. The studio smelled faintly of lavender and beeswax, a scent that had become part of the walls themselves. Eliza tied her hair back and pulled on her soft linen apron. Today, she planned to spend the morning in her lavender garden, tending to the rows of violet blooms behind the cottage. It was from these plants that she drew both her livelihood and her peace. She stepped outside with her basket, the drizzle now reduced to a fine mist. The garden was lush, framed by a low stone wall covered in moss. Beyond it stretched meadows and hedgerows, blurred slightly by the lingering fog. The lavender swayed gently, their tips heavy with dew. She ran her fingertips over them, releasing that familiar calming scent. Even after years, it never grew old. The way a single breath of lavender could steady her thoughts. She began to trim the older stems carefully, humming softly as she worked. Birds flitted through the trees, robins, mostly, their songs weaving in and out of the sound of her clippers. A little while later, the postman appeared at the gate, his bicycle bell ringing cheerfully. "Morning, Miss Hart," he called, holding up a small bundle of letters. Eliza smiled, wiping her hands on her apron before taking them. "Good morning, Tom. You'll catch a chill in this weather." He grinned. "Not me, miss. Got my waterproof and my flask, warm as toast." She chuckled and took the letters. "Thank you. There'll be a parcel or two for you tomorrow. The new batch is ready." "Lovely," he said, tipping his cap. "My wife says your candles make the house smell better than fresh bread." Eliza laughed softly. "Then she has very good taste. When he pedaled away, she lingered a moment longer among the lavender. The world felt wrapped in mist and softness, every sound muffled. She could almost hear her own heartbeat. She gathered her harvest, stems tied in neat bundles with twine, and carried them back inside. The cottage was warm and golden after the gray outdoors. She placed the lavender on a wide drying rack by the window, where it would crisp gently in the days to come. After that, she turned to her work table. It was time to package yesterday's batch for delivery. She loved this part almost as much as making the candles, the transformation from craft to gift. She laid out squares of brown paper, their surfaces textured like linen. Each candle jar was wrapped carefully, the folds crisp and neat, secured with twine. Into the knot, she tucked a small sprig of dried lavender and sealed it with a circular wax stamp, her initials entwined in delicate script. There was something timeless about it, as though she was part of a long tradition of makers who believed beauty was in the smallest details. She paused midway through wrapping to light the stove and make herself another coffee. The aroma filled the air, blending with the faint perfume of lavender and melted wax. She carried her mug to the window seat, where marble had once again claimed his cushion, curled up like a silver comma. Outside, the drizzle had deepened into gentle rain. Drops traced lazy paths down the window, and beyond the glass, the world looked soft-edged and dreamlike. Eliza sipped her coffee slowly, watching the patterns of the rain. She thought about how strange it was, how a life so simple could feel so complete. There had been a time when she thought fulfillment came from noise, movement, ambition. She used to work in London, surrounded by screens and chatter, her days spent under fluorescent lights. Then one day, she'd visited a village market on a whim. The kind of day you don't realize will change your life until much later. She bought a handmade candle from an old woman at a stall. It smelled of lavender and smoke, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she'd lit it that night and sat still for the first time in months. She remembered the way the flame had flickered, the calm that settled inside her. That was when she decided, perhaps a little foolishly, perhaps bravely, to leave the city and learn how to make candles herself. And so here she was. The rain eased by mid-afternoon, leaving everything washed and clean. The clouds thinned, and light began to pour back into the valley. Eliza decided it was time to take her basket of wrapped candles to the honeycomb pantry. She pulled on her wool coat and boots, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and stepped outside. The path was slick but glistening, and the scent of rain lingered in the air. Cottagecore mingled with with lavender and soil. The village lay just beyond the bend, a cluster of cottages and stone-fronted shops along the high street. She walked at an easy pace, the wicker basket swinging from her arm, the bells on the bakery door jingling faintly as she passed. When she reached the shop, Mrs. Thistle was there, arranging jars of local honey on the shelves. The interior smelled of beeswax, jam, and polished wood, a cozy haven against the damp air. "Eliza, my dear," Mrs. Thistle exclaimed, her round face lighting up. "Ah, the new batch. I could smell them before you came through the door." Eliza set the basket down on the counter and began unpacking the candles. "Lavender and hearthfire," she said softly, "and a few of the rain on cedarwood ones, too." The shopkeeper leaned in, inhaling deeply. "Heavenly. You have a gift, child. People don't just buy your candles, they buy peace." Eliza smiled, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "That's kind of you to say. I just try to bottle what I feel here." Mrs. Thistle nodded knowingly. "And that's exactly why they sell. The scent of this village, the quiet of it, the warmth of home. You can't fake that in a factory." They chatted a little more about the fair, about the baker's new sourdough. And then Eliza made her way home as the afternoon light mellowed into gold. By the time she reached Willowmere Cottage, the fields were brushed with amber. The rain clouds had drifted off, leaving a pale rainbow hanging faintly over the hill. She stood for a moment, basket empty now, watching the way the light caught the wet leaves. Inside, she placed a new bundle of lavender on the table to dry and lit a candle, not for work, but for herself. The flame danced quietly, reflecting in the glass jars around the room. She began to tidy up, wiping down the workbench, stacking her notes, sorting through small vials of oils. The room carried that faint hum of contentment, the soft crackle of the candle, the rhythmic ticking of the clock, and the occasional sigh of the wind outside. As dusk began to settle, Eliza poured herself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the fire. The logs glowed softly, their embers a deeper orange than any flame she'd ever poured into wax. Outside, the sky deepened to indigo. The first stars blinked awake, scattered like salt across velvet. She could hear the distant call of an owl, and somewhere far away, a stream murmured through the fields. The cottage felt smaller at night, cozier, a little universe of its own. She rose to draw the curtains, then paused, candle in hand, by the window. The reflection of her face mingled with the dark outside, a woman framed by flickering light, alone, yet entirely at peace. She whispered softly, "Good night, world," and blew out the candle. If If this story brought a touch of calm and comfort to your evening, don't forget to subscribe to Moonlit Whispers, where quiet moments and gentle rhythms guide you softly into sleep. Good night, and may your dreams be as warm and comforting as the flicker of a candle.